Then you know what happens? 6 years later, you find yourself singing Sorry with a Fringe on Top in front of Ira!
Welcome to In Front of Ira.
We're Sabrina
and Torsten.
Two people who talk about romcoms while sitting on a couch.
And also historians and friends and lovers of romantic comedies.
I can't do this with you right now. Anyway, we're talking about My Big Fat Greek Wedding from 2002. Mm-hmm. Which was written by Nia Vardalos, who is also the lead in this, and directed by Joel Zwick, who I just looked up is not related to famed producer Ed Zwick, who did, I think, important movies like Richie Rich. Don't knock Richie Rich. I watched it as a kid.
I did watch that as a kid in cinema,
I saw it a lot on German TV. Yeah. My Big Fat Greek Wedding is about a Greek woman or like Greek American woman called Tula, mm-hmm. who sort of starts out as like depressed. I think we can
depressed and wearing a lot of brown,
and the typical sort of doesn't know what to do with her life because she's been single for a long time. Her family is trying to pressure her to marry and have kids since basically she was 12 because Greek people have children and their father is very much the patriarch, even though the women know how to handle him. But like the women also agree that the women should get married and have kids. So that doesn't help. Both her siblings are around and are married. The family owns various businesses that all the children also work at. She is a seating hostess at the Greek restaurant, dancing Zorbas that the family runs. And there at one of these days, John Corbett walks into the restaurant with his friend, and she clearly is immediately struck by him. And he doesn't really... He recognizes, like, he sees her more than other people, but this doesn't go anywhere because she's simply too shy to even really say anything. But it's sort of a moment for her where she starts to want to turn her life around, as all these stories tend to go. And
that's what they teach you in screenwriting class. Make it about the most important moment in your character's life.
She starts to wear makeup and do her hair and go to business school to end up working at the travel agency her aunt runs. And this is where she will run into John Corbett again. And they finally struck up a romance. And because the title is My Big Fat Greek Wedding.
So it's going there.
You probably know where this is going.
Yeah. I have to say I'm not even 100% certain I saw this when it came out or at any point later. I watched it yesterday. I thought there was going to be much more wedding in this. I thought it was the way that it had kind of stuck in my mind. And again, I don't know if this is misremembered from seeing it or if it's just like kind of seeping through the culture, that this is a crazy kind of big Greek wedding and that's the thing. But maybe I'm just confusing it with Mamma Mia.
I feel like I've seen the second two, like the second film, not as a third. I haven't seen the third. That might, I don't know, I think it's their kids' wedding. Maybe it's more in the focus.
Maybe I just like...
And it's more like, but yeah, it's true. I mean, obviously the culture clash will happen with the wedding, but actually the wedding is obviously at the end of the film because that's where all of this is going. And then we only get a coda where it's a few years later and have their own kid and live next to the parents because,
The only way you can tell it's later is because of a newer car.
Yeah. But... I mean, so you always know that they're going to succeed and get married and have a big fat Greek wedding, which I think in and of itself is interesting. I mean, we all know it's a trope, obviously. But it's again, basically the storyline is she has to get her own life in order for this to work and like learn to step up to her parents to make this work. Because obviously the big conflict of this is that her family is very traditional and very proud of their country, and it's a classic, the second generation immigrant story where her parents are the ones that did come over from Greece, and wanted better things for their children. And there's a conversation in there with her mother where she's like, we came here so you could have this, so you have a life, because they were from a very small, I think, island or a small town. So I want you to live your life. But obviously they do think she should marry someone Greek, and they try to set her up even when they find out she is dating this guy. But at some point they come around because she also learns to like assert herself enough that they have to just simply live with this now. And he's from the most waspy family possible, where it's basically just his parents who are very stuck up.
They're the cliche wasps. Like if you think you've seen cliche wasps like in 90s comedies where like a treasure trove for cliche wasps, these are even clicheer. They're more clicheer.
Which to me is funny because Sean Corbett doesn't look like their son. Maybe it's because he has the long hair. I mean, obviously he is also the second generation out of a family where he also doesn't fit in, and I think that is an intentional parallel. He's way more chill and probably more politically liberal, even though they don't really touch upon that. But he's like an English teacher. He has long hair. He's clearly not following in the cliche waspy ways of like the country club and all of their like life. And he might not be as educated about the Greek culture yet, but he's just open-minded about other cultures, and that's the idea we get of him. He's more of a way more free spirit than his stuck-up parents, and she's obviously sort of the odd one out of this clan, where she wants other things in her life too that aren't just based around marrying someone else Greek. And
the interesting story, kind of the development, because this is based on her play. Like Nia Vardalos wrote
it was
a play. Like the story goes, is kind of like the Hollywood lore story is that Rita Wilson, who is also famously or infamously, or maybe you don't know, of Greek descent, and
her mom's Greek. We looked this up yesterday.
Yeah,
her dad is, what was it? I forgot. Eastern European.
Eastern European, yeah. Unspecified Eastern European.
Because she has a very
like
different birth name that isn't Rita Wilson, but it's also not Greek because her mom is the Greek one.
And obviously is married to Tom Hanks. And so this is like 2000-ish when she sees, I think it's around that time when she sees the play and kind of convinces her husband and production company this should be a movie, and then it becomes a movie. And you see that this is not a huge movie, like not a huge budget.
Yeah. Still more of an indie, but like
it's kind of
an indie with a better budget than the usual indie, because it's Rita Wilson and Tom Hanks.
And you kind of notice it sometimes. Sometimes the sound wasn't all that perfect. I'm like, oh wow, this would not have happened on like a $60 million movie.
Yeah. And they did shoot in Canada, I think, even though it's probably supposed to be Chicago.
It's supposed to be Chicago. In the movie. I'm not sure because she also is Canadian.
Okay, so maybe it's just supposed to be actually
maybe
Toronto?
It was originally meant to be Toronto, but I think it's actually meant to be Chicago in the movie.
Okay.
I think it's mentioned.
Do we actually? Okay.
I think it's mentioned in the movie.
Maybe it's been a Canadian film the whole time, and none of us, we all retcon it into being a US American, because
I think it's no. It's mentioned. Hold on. I have notes. I have notes.
This is so weird because like obviously in my mind it was always the US, but I never looked
Greek music over a nighttime. What does it say? A nighttime rainy U.S. skyline, and I wrote Chicago because it places it in Chicago, Illinois. That's the beginning. It's never really quite referenced, and obviously since they shot this in Toronto, like they probably didn't want to use any specific Chicago landmarks.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I think the beauty of it also is it could also be New York, it could be elsewhere, because what it is at its heart is like the cliche second generation immigrant storyline to the US, and there's certain commonality between cultures, particularly if it's Mediterranean cultures. Like it could be Italian American, and you could do very similar things with it. Of course, there's certain Greek specificity, especially your father will constantly always says the Greeks are the best nation, and every word goes back to Greece, all of these kinds of things and
including
details.
Kimono.
But I think it resonates in ways, and I think it borrows from other films that have done similar, like Moonstruck is, I think, fits in the same way that it is this kind of like neighborhood or like this. I mean, they specifically live in a neighborhood where there aren't any other Greeks, but they clearly there are other Greeks because they constantly meet up with their huge families and they have their own tight-knit community and they have certain businesses
And they have Greek
run
businesses,
and one of them obviously is a restaurant, these kinds of things.
Which is funny because I remember since we studied American studies, and one of the things that was very much stressed in all the literature on immigration when it came to Greek people is that they would open up cheap restaurants where you could get good food for cheap. Like that was like a specific thing about Greek people in the US.
Because Italians totally didn't, or the Chinese or anyone else.
It wasn't cheap. I don't know.
I mean, Chinese food used to be with some of the cheapest food you could get. Comparatively, I think also. But yeah, I mean, I think there's that commonality. What also reminded me of Moonstruck, even though the storyline is obviously different and Moonstruck is weirder in different ways, but I think there's a commonality in how the culture is presented and something about, I think, the set design and the costuming and the art design and also just this idea of like when you look at the way they decorate their houses and everything, and they're very stuck, at least still in the 80s. I mean, two of our parents' houses too, even in the early 2000s, a lot of shit would have looked like in the 80s. But there's a certain other like flair to it, with those communities, obviously, and it's greatly exaggerated by the screenwriter, by like Nia Vardalos, I think. Also, because I think what's part of the storyline is also her not only realizing that she wants something different from her family and that she has to assert herself, but at the same time finding her place within this community in the family, because she clearly doesn't want to leave them behind. She also needs to actually accept it, because I think starting out, she's very sarcastic about them and very critical of them. And it feels like she comes into her Greek heritage more as the film goes on, because she suddenly has her own personality and is starting to see the good of all of this too. Because I think she's super critical starting out. And some of this has to do, obviously, with the expectations her parents put on her, but also the fact that she looks different and she does different things growing up than all the blonde American girls. So there's a lot of internalized self-hate that she has to like get over and realize not everything about her family is bad. Actually, it's just different. And part of it is literally, I think, growing up. Yeah. I think the interesting part about her transformation, because she does kind of have like almost like an Eliza Doolittle type transformation, but it's not externally put upon her. She at some point makes a decision, and that decision is, I will go to school, I will go to college, to Harry S. Truman College, I think is the one. And should look up what that is.
and I will present myself in a different way. And then you see her at college and she sits with the popular kids, and they don't immediately reject her.
No,
right?
because
she's
so
an
much
adult now.
internalized, right? Because of course she was different as a kid, because she's an immigrant kid and they're all necessarily different. And she had to go to Greek school and her hair looked different and she had weird food with her. And that is a common immigrant experience no matter where from, because people are bigoted, even though she's white, right? But there's this whole thing. And yeah, by the end she kind of comes around to it. And I think it also helps that she's with someone from the super waspy family, but she also realizes that the grass isn't always greener, I think, because his parents seem supportive enough, but they're clearly not as warm, and all the dinner conversations are very stifled. And I think maybe she's starting to realize that what she has is not that bad because of this too, and that they can bring these two families together, and her family can coax his family out of the shell, which they also do, like at the wedding when they finally get some ouzo into them, like that kind of thing, right? It's very cookie cutter in a way of like how this is told, but that's also why it works, because it's just, you know exactly where this is gonna go, but you still want to see it happen, right? That's the beauty of the rom-com, but also this kind of immigrant story of like culture clashing, right?
Yeah, and it's one of the movies that kind of bring me back to my constant commentary on all these stories. The more specific you make it, the more universal it gets, right? The more specifically it's this culture, then you're also saying, yeah, but your culture also like has something different that doesn't fit with the mainstream culture, and it becomes much more accessible. And I really like when a movie just completely loses itself in that milieu and just kind of describes all the specifics, not necessarily even of like Greek culture or like immigrant Greek culture, but like the culture that she experienced growing, like the specific version of it, and that's super fun. Like the dad with the Windex, which is my favorite running gag that everything gets solved by the Windex, and
which you of course see when they're in the car and get like have a little chat with each other before they get out of the car to go into the church to have their ceremony. And it's like, can we still get away from this? And she's like, oh, and I have a like zit on my face. And he's like, I had a zit this morning. What happened to it? I put Windex on it. And it's like
that's when Jen Corbett has become basically part of the family.
He has been Greekified.
The dad is an interesting character because he's very sympathetic. He's kind of like the cutest patriarchal misogynist you can imagine, which is it's in itself.
Why
right?
are you doing this to me?
Yeah, I found it kind of hard to like him at times. He's clearly not supposed to be like the bad guy. He's clearly someone who also is supposed to show growth, but it's still kind of very much like he's not quote unquote an enlightened character in that sense. And it has to be okay.
And I think you can also tell that it's the cliche patriarch who thinks he's in charge because the women around him let him believe he is, but we get hints that they know how to micromanage him well enough that he actually isn't that powerful anymore. So you can also see where he can get swayed into, like, because I mean, they're always like, we just need to make him believe that it was his idea that Tula should work at the travel agency, and within like a 5-minute conversation,
her mom basically,
her mom and her aunt, and you can also see in the generations that clearly her brother seems to not be taking on the same kind of masculinity. He's still sort of the bit of a cliche dude idiot. Bro.
Yeah, he's a dude bro.
But he's supportive of her. And I think this is also one of the other things. So like, okay, my family's very big on overwhelming, but I have all of the support that my husband, like, he doesn't have siblings. He doesn't even have many friends he can bring. And
he has Ian Gomez, which is interesting because I don't know if they were married at the time, but he was married to Nia Vardalos for a long time.
Oh, I didn't know this.
Until I think 2018, they divorced, but they were married for a long time.
That's really funny. His uglier friend is her actual. It's like, I'm gonna make a movie where I marry John Corbett, and you can play his friend.
He's don't say that. He's adorable.
Yeah,
he's wonderful.
John Corbett.
Sorry, John Corbett with that hair? I don't know.
I mean, he had that hair in the Sex and the City, and to me, he's still the worser boyfriend to Carrie, but I don't want to start beef with Sex and the City.
Yeah. don't get yourself accidentally canceled.
I unfortunately prefer Big over Aiden.
I have heard these names before, but as we've discussed, I've seen maybe 4 episodes of Sex and the City.
I've seen the whole show 50 million times.
Yeah.
But I think that also is what gets him this gig, even though we've discussed that he was supposed to show up and be the ex machina boyfriend for Julia Roberts in My Best Friend's Wedding at the very, very end. And that is a bit before. So clearly you can tell he's a guy who's been auditioning for leading male parts for a long time, because he's also not 20 anymore, right? And before that, like, Sex and the City is the gig he finally gets, and that makes him leading man material.
He was bouncing, or he was a TV actor. He was kind of had a secondary but important role in Northern Exposure. That's kind of like the thing that kicks his
and I
career,
think Sex and the City
off,
helps because obviously it's TV, but it's HBO. It's like obviously massively popular, and because he's a romantic lead, you can sort of see him graduate to feature film from there.
It's like the tryout for a romantic lead.
And in between that, which is funny, and this is a movie still should do for Christmas next time, Serendipity, because in that he's not the right boyfriend of Kate Beckinsale.
I have seen that.
And
I have completely forgotten everything about that.
He's like also not the right boyfriend in Sex and the City in so many ways. So like he, unfortunately, this is the one where he actually gets the girl and he's the right one. And I'm not sure, like, there's a movie he did like a couple years later with Kate Hudson that nobody saw, that I randomly saw, where he's pastor.
I mean, that kind of fits.
Yeah, and there he also gets the girl, but like, yeah, he seems to always play second fiddle a little bit.
What I like about his character in this is that he is in a way underdeveloped, because he's basically a
fantasy.
He is basically a fantasy for this character who, and the way that she also kind of like she is introduced. The first time he's introduced in the restaurant, he's the only one who laughs at a joke that she makes, and then he recognizes her only later when they actually like start dating, but he basically sees her in the travel agency through the window and is very much taken with her.
Yeah.
And that is kind of a fantasy, right? You walk out into the world and somebody is so into you that there's a scene where he like runs into this woman.
Where he pretends to walk down the stairs, like fake stairs, and then runs into this older woman who like hits him with her purse.
Which lovely physical
and then
humor.
That's when she brings him in and they have a conversation. And then they have the conversation about the fact that this Greek restaurant he wants to take her to is the one that her family owns, and then the realization comes that he met her, which, I mean, obviously couldn't be faulted for not recognizing her because they had a very brief interaction and she looked very different. But the fact that he even then starts to remember this, and it's like, I remember you, is obviously, again, the fantasy of like, he sort of saw her, but she didn't see herself, so that wasn't the right moment yet. But clearly, again, it's
she literally hides, right? She literally goes
physically
down,
hides.
physically hides behind
clearly
counters.
Is a catalyst moment for her in this moment to say, oh, something could change. It sparks something in her to just, there could be this possibility, but right now I'm just hiding from all of this and I should stop. And I think he's definitely underdeveloped. He's a walking fantasy because he does everything we wanted to. But I think that also makes sense in a way because it's very clearly her point of view of things. We get voiceover narration of hers. It is her sort of, again, coming to terms with herself and her immigrant background storyline. And it needs that romantic catalyst in a way. But it's not... I mean, this is actually an interesting question of like, yes, sure, this is a rom-com because it has the cultural clash and
it's pretty funny. The Windex scenes.
And it's in a wedding, but it leans even more into having one clear protagonist rather than two, which is not always the case. Something like Bridget Jones does too, where it's clearly the focus on the woman, but like films like When Harry Met Sally, it's clearly like both of them are equal. So there's like this there's a tendency of like there's certain rom-coms that are very clearly told from the woman's point of view and the men are less developed because we don't see them without them. Like we don't really see him much without her. I think there's one scene where he invites his friend to his wedding, but even with his parents, we only see, I think, his parents with her most of the time when she gets to be invited for dinner, which also, by the way, is the other reference. Guess who's coming to dinner is the cliche, like, I mean, obviously much more serious because it's about black-white relations in the US, but that is kind of one of the OG films that all of these kind of also recur to, because clearly you always get the actual dinner scenes where you get invited over and have to meet the parents, and then they will say horribly racist things, either intentionally or sort of unintentionally. Like them who don't know somehow the difference between Greek, Armenian, and Venezuela, like something.
Yeah.
Like,
was it Guatemala? No, wait, I have it. I think it's Guatemala.
Like not even the same continent.
Yeah. Greek, Armenian, Guatemalan. You had an assistant once that was Greek. Oh no, she was Armenian. No, she was Guatemalan. Like, okay, she was clearly a foreigner, and that's the only thing you remember.
Speaking of Armenian and having brought up Moonstruck, I think Cher would kind of fit into this, which maybe now explains why Cher came into Mamma Mia at some point, because Cher is Armenian. But it's also just a vibe.
I think what's interesting about all of this is that the way that all of these immigrant families are typically portrayed is much closer to kind of village life in Europe, right? Like you don't typically see these kind of the immigrant experience as like my family were, you know, like bankers in Paris and then we immigrated. That's also because there's not that much of a culture class. There's like an inherent kind of cosmopolitanness to people who already think of themselves as higher class, or people who are trying to be
it's always about trying to do the upward mobility thing, right? Again, we want a better life, and you can see that her parents live in this very more middle upper class, posher neighborhood, but they're the odd ones out, and this is where her embarrassment of herself and a second embarrassment for her family and her parents comes from, because they clash with all the wasps that live around them. So there's also a certain class sensibility to this, because obviously they now have more money because they run all of these very successful businesses, and by the end her parents give them a house. I mean, obviously next door, but like this is still the early 2000s. I mean, it's before the bubble bursts, but it's still, that means they saved a lot of money, and you can tell this is sort of the immigrant dream fulfilled in a way. They now make enough that they can fully give this life to their children, and she's finally in a place where she sees how much that is worth, and like how much her parents do actually love her for all their faults of how they think she should be living her life. And she finds a compromise between, it's not like she never wanted a partner and children, she just didn't necessarily want the weird Greek dude that they brought in that is 20 years older than her.
Yeah, which is kind of the thing that when you talked about the Big Sick, that's kind of obviously a scene that takes up on that.
Yeah, the Big
Sick
kind of
is the suitors.
Definitely is very also inspired by this one again. So there's a certain tradition of these kinds of immigrant background rom-coms, or in the case of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, not just rom-coms, but of a storyline of American film.
The interesting thing about them buying her a house and then the house being next door, and the only thing she's ever about this is happy, right? There's no I want to get farther away from my parents. I want to strike out on my own. She is part of this family, and she never doesn't want to be part of this family. There are just aspects of this immigrant experience that she wants to jettison.
Find her place within this.
It's not a rejection at all.
She's not even saying, I want to work somewhere else, I want to go to school, because if I was like, why are you doing this to me, going away to college? She's like, no, she wants to go to college in town to take classes, to instead work at the travel agency her family also owns. It's just something where she can do something she likes and like make more of herself, but she doesn't actually, like, she could have easily, like so many kids also do, go to a college or university in a different city and just get away from it all. So it's again just trying to do that, and then incorporating her husband into this as a also, like, I mean, it still informs how she's dating him, right? I mean, it clearly takes them several dates before they have sex, which is also not something that modern rom-coms usually, like, they drag it out sometimes because too often, obviously, the leads have obstacles why they can't even date each other. So obviously sex isn't happening. But in a case where that's not the case, the sex happens earlier because that's what modern dating is like. And you can tell she is maybe even more traditional about this herself, but maybe because she also has hang-ups about like how committed she wants to get to him, because she knows this can't go anywhere. But it takes a while for her to have sex with him. Also, I mean, it also has to do with the fact that she can take him inside and she still lives with her parents, but like he at some point takes her to his apartment, and I mean that was an option earlier, presumably. So it's
her growing into her full self, but step by step across this movie.
And I mean, that's the thing. Again, I think there are values that she does share with her parents. She just needs to realize she does actually do this, and she doesn't reject this fully. And which is interesting, right? She's obviously not against traditional family life. Otherwise, she wouldn't end up with the kids and the marriage and all of this. So, and
the kid going to Greek school exactly like it.
So she sort of reconfirms all of this by the end. You're looking at your notes.
No, I'm looking at my notes, because the way that her life is kind of stuck in a rut in the beginning is very much, it's not it's a tell don't show. She literally comes on the voiceover and says, but it's useless to dream because nothing ever changes.
And that's the second
and it's kind of, it's very much on the nose, but it kind of has to be because just the fact that this guy walked in and looked like someone she's interested in and noticed her, and that was just the tiniest little spark. You maybe don't need to dream big, you just need to dream that literally another world is possible.
You need to believe, exactly, you just need to believe you can change, to actually do change at some point.
Which that is kind of the thing that I think also connects it to Moonstruck, because fundamentally Nicolas Cage in Moonstruck is the guy who's like, oh, I don't know, it went out Jimmy Stewart when I did this, but there's a weird likeness, who kind of like is sad and is mopey and is constantly blaming his brother, and in the end he just needed that spark to get over himself.
And Cher's character, even though she's Cher, is also like, she hasn't dyed her hair, she's not really wearing makeup, she's let herself go, and that is the clearest parallel to how these stories start out, because even her father's like, you're starting to look so old, and I mean, she says he basically started saying this when she was like 16 or something, but it's also true, because she's like not making anything of herself, and it's not really just about looks. And also in Moonstruck, she decides to do this makeover on herself because she finally has enough reason. Sure, she wants to dress up for this guy, but it's also about the self-worth, about loving herself more and taking better care of herself, that then puts her in a position to date someone, rather than like, oh, we need this fancy makeover for him to find me attractive. It's really
he never says anything about it.
No.
Really, he just, and also
Never comments on it.
What I loved about the zit scene, there's a scene where everybody tries to fix her zit, and then then they get married, and the scene where he says, oh, I had a zit, I put Windex on, but also he didn't notice that she had a big ass zit that was just bare, and it was covered up in a way that you as the audience saw that it was covered up, and he didn't notice. He doesn't care, so she isn't doing it for him.
He's about to marry her. Why would he care? I mean, this is also the thing of like, the older I get, I mean, I still make a fuss, obviously, when I go on a date once upon a blue moon or whatever, or like I go out and in a situation where that, because I also like that it's also about, again, like making myself look good, and like, but the older you get, the more you realize that once you actually do like someone, none of this matters all that much. It's nice to look nice for someone and make an effort, but you also do that for yourself. But once you're actually with someone, and it doesn't even have to be like after 50 million dates, it doesn't matter anymore if your makeup is gone or smudged, and if you like sleep over somewhere, that will have like, your makeup will be off, and you might have taken a shower, and your hair will be wet, or your hair is a complete mess, or whatever. It doesn't fucking matter. But when you were 15, that's all you ever fucking thought about mattering, and then nobody finds me attractive anymore or whatever. And yeah.
And it's not because I'm lonely, and it's not because it's New Year's Eve. Yeah. It's really interesting how related these movies, how Moonstruck and My Big Fat Greek Wedding are. I never thought of them in any way similar. No. And I'm honestly not sure if the critics at the time really kind of picked up on that.
I looked this up because we only watched last night, and we're sitting here, full confession.
This is our full confession is Sabrina's here for like 2.5 days, and we're like, we got to record at least 2 podcasts,
2 days.
and we are doing our best here.
But yeah, I think, I mean, this is always the thing of like rom-coms. I mean, you watch them for the good feelings of the happy end, maybe, or the romance aspect, sure, because sometimes it can be this epic swoon-worthy romance, but a lot of them are actually like these smaller stories, like the Nora Ephron films, where it's just a lot of people talking and thinking about their own issues and trying to solve their own issues. And I think that's why you stick with them, because there's always something relatable about this, especially in your 30s. And most rom-com heroes are in their 30s. Like, sure, we get somewhere there in their 20s. Like My Best Friend's Wedding, where we also discussed that it's so clear that they're in their 20s in hindsight. But like, of course, some of the newer ones where they try to make whatever new young actress happen, I honestly think sometimes they lack something just because, like, what are your fucking struggles in your 20s? I mean, I never want to go back. Your 20s are awful. But again, you have so much other fucking shit going on. And at least in a more, I don't know, in current culture, I think more people get married later and have kids later. Let's do that as a supposition. So the struggle is mostly you have a shitty job or you have an internship or you go to university and you have all this other fucking shit going on. Why should we also care about which idiot you're currently
and
dating?
also this is the thing
It's like,
also
is this gonna be the forever person? Like,
I think we're all just kind of like, oh, Romeo and Juliet was so romantic. Yeah, because they were
14.
idiots. They were 14-year-old idiots. Like the only way that all of this high romance really makes sense is if you have absolutely nothing to compare it to.
and I mean, again, yeah, sure, some people meet in their 20s and stick together forever, like you did, for instance. But it's most of the time, if you're out there in the dating world, I also had a long-term relationship in my 20s, but the more interesting stories tend to happen later because, let's face it, even if you were in a relationship at the time, most of us really only fully sort of grow up and still have other shit to sort out in our 30s. And this is where these stories tend to make more sense then.
Yeah, I tend to think that, and Nia Vardalos is 40 in this. I think she's supposed to be mid-30s by like the movie, but like since the play was earlier, so it would have taken. But
it feels like a very early mid-30s kind of story.
That's kind of what it's supposed to be, and I think that's kind of like that Bridget Jones age, like 32 to 35. I think is the most
which is
often
also the Sex
taken.
In the City, where like one of them
age.
is older, but like most of them is that age of like, well, we didn't make the cut. We aren't one of the, like, as they call them in Bridget Jones, the smug marrieds. But there's a lot of us out there who just constantly go on dates and it's not happening for us. And in her case, obviously, it's also not happening because she is sort of stuck. But yeah, and she doesn't even put herself out there. But yeah, I think it makes sense.
Yeah, it's also, there is also something about, there's something about the 30 plus rom-coms, and I would even include like the ones where they're clearly older, like the new Bridget Jones potentially, and the Nancy Meyers movies.
Yeah.
I would say there's something about finding kind of like the final version of yourself, like in a way, in the sense that doesn't happen with like the teen romance stuff, because like the most disappointing thing about all the teen romance stuff is like, oh yeah, and then you're gonna have to figure out all the other stuff, and like, and there's this whole like the trope of the we going to prom, which is kind of like the ersatz wedding, but the happily ever after may or may not involve this person at all, right? It might just be like 3 months later, we'll never see each other again.
A movie we'll never do in here because it's not a rom-com, but it has certain parts of it is American Pie. And like people always just remember the pie and Eugene Levy talking about condoms or whatever. But it's, what it actually does is that it has all these couples that sort of go through this moment, but mostly these four young guys who start dating someone, or one of them even breaks up by the end of the film, who's the one who's dating the whole time. But there is that moment of like, and now what? Because now I met someone and we're gonna go off to college. Are we gonna make this work? Like, how's this gonna work? And then one of them breaks up because they know they're not gonna make it work. And there's this bittersweet moment to it of like realizing that maybe all of this nonsense we just did for months to finally get laid by prom didn't matter all that much, because it's only just starting now. And real romance and real dating is so much more complicated than trying to get laid or trying to whatever. And I think in your 20s it's still sort of that you're not even a person yet. That is the other thing I think with rom-coms. If you have someone who's like 22, you realize later how much of a person you're not yet, even then, because you're like,
speak for yourself. I was exactly who I was at 22.
But I think this is, again, it's like these parts of life where like there's a lot of shit happening in your 30s where so you might have to reorient in your job, or you want to, like she does. it's just phases of life, which is also, I think, where the older age romance works, when it's usually you're already your 60s-ish or like late 50s, because for a lot of people that's a new chapter, because they might be widowed, which is going to be the new Bridget Jones, or something's got to give. You just divorced and have been for a while, and the kids are leaving the house, or you're an empty nester. And it's just a transitional phase. And it's always about these kind of moments where things shift. I think if you get a job in your early 20s, or you might be in a relationship, chances are the next transitional moment will be in your early 30s, because either you just get out of this relationship, or you're going to get married and start to have kids. But something will shift. And this is what I think that picks
Which
up on.
I think could be our grand unified theory of romantic comedies. They're all about transitions.
Yeah. And mostly, again, coming back to Nora Ephron, is like the internalized, the Jewish tradition of the comedy, about the internalized conflict, about like just working through your fucking issues so you can actually be a person someone wants to date. Because if you don't know yourself or love yourself, chances are you're not going to sustain any kind of relationship with someone who actually makes you happy. And worst cases, it opens you up to abuse. Other cases, you just, everything keeps fizzling out, or it's just not sticking, or,
Yeah. The thing that I want to come back to is the title of this movie, My Big Fat Greek Wedding, because he's not in that, right? He's technically in the wedding, but it's and it's big fat, as in like all stops pulled out, like we're going full
with
hog.
the Aphrodite Palace backdrop that's optional.
Wonderful. And Greek wedding, and that's her world. All of this is her world, right? There is no our intercultural romance. It's her big fat Greek wedding, and that's the perspective. And I think that's very interesting, because even a lot of movies where it is about one person, even Bridget Jones, which we did, which is named after Bridget Jones, still kind of tries to present these other characters as people kind of inhabiting the same world. And this one is just basically about this one woman who has a very specific life experience that matters, and it matters more than anyone else's, because that's her movie.
Yeah. And I wanted to say something about this, I immediately forgot, because I was trying to look up taglines.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of, so the way the sort of the Metascore and the IMDb score both hover around 6.6, 62. I thought it would have thought it was gonna be a bit like higher. I mean,
again, all of them always are.
But always then, like the Rolling Stone review was really, really, really positive. For instance, Entertainment Weekly, for whatever reason, really fucking hated it, because it said it's hideous, pandering cliches that look rejected from bad Jewish and Italian sitcoms, which, however, taps into this idea of like there's a certain commonality to certain white European communities.
It's funny though, because they must have known she wrote this, right?
Which is interesting again, like she's writing about her experience.
They're telling her experience is a cliche.
Why are you telling us it's wrong? And of course she's heightening it, because it's also her perspective, which is again like she clearly has issues with her family she's trying to overcome, and by the time she does this, it's fine, and you can tell that this is her perspective. And she's allowed to make fun of her own family. My God, like, I don't know. So, just like a lot of the Jewish sitcoms were written by Jewish people who make fun of their own experience. So, I don't know. But
yeah, I think there's just a certain type of reviewer who doesn't seem to appreciate specific perspectives, right?
Yeah. I found the tagline.
Oh, yeah. Now it's going to be fun.
Love is here to stay. So is her family.
That's fair. That's pretty good.
Fair. It's actually nailing it.
Do you have a fake one?
Put some Windex on it.
We're like, My Big Fat Greek Wedding, brought to you by Windex.
When in doubt, Windex.
Yeah. It's just a Windex commercial, basically.
Yeah,
sometimes your family's Greek, sometimes your family's toast.
Yeah. Which is also, I mean, I think you could, and people have written essays about this, how obviously WASP is also a very clearly recognizable cultural white identity, but it's the norm that everything is measured up against. But it's so easy to make a fun of and do a parody of that it's clear that it's just as cliche as like making fun of the Greek ones, right?
Which is interesting because like I haven't seen this in ages, but Dharma and Greg is basically this idea of like culture clash with the WASP being really the focus of it, right? Like the it's her intruding into this waspiness and kind of like taking like a tornado sandstorm vibe to the whole thing, Which is not a thing people say, but I'm just saying it now. A tornado sandstorm vibe.
You heard it here first. It's gonna become a thing.
Tornado sandstorm vibe.
Happens.
We're gonna make tornado sandstorm vibe happen.
But yeah, I think that's my big fig winning. I mean, I think it does hold up. I can't speak to the sequels. I don't know why they had to make those.
Yeah, good question.
I'm disappointed John Stamos was in none of them. Anyway.
Yeah.
Or Jennifer Aniston.
Or Jason Mantzoukas. Like the Greeks of Hollywood need to be in this. I don't know what's happening.
Don't know either.
Anyway.
That's it.
That's it.